Hey everyone, and welcome to the Grow Hemp series. Today, we'll be regenerating a plant outdoors during the off-season. So for Grow Log 10, we'll be taking a look at another regenerated plant. Except unlike Grow Log number 6, where we regenerated a plant in the middle of the grow season, this one will be a lot more interesting. Let's start first with the plant. This is the harvested stem from Grow Log 7, which was used to make seeds with. And right off the bat, I wanted to see what would happen if I regenerated it, if it would regenerate at all, and if the fact that the original plant produced seeds would change anything about the plant the second time around. As I explained in the Space Bucket Grow Log, due to the low height clearance of the Space Bucket, I only used the bottom 2/3 of the fabric pot, so more than likely the roots in the pot are already at capacity. Another thing I noticed with using a soil and perlite mix is that over a long period of time of a few months, the perlite will slowly move towards the top of the pot after each watering because of how lightweight it is, especially when the new root growth is fighting for space in the pot. So while it looks like I added a new top layer perlite to the grow, that isn't the case. As you can see here, I started this process in the late fall, where I was getting about 11 hours of sunlight a day. So to trick the plant into going back to the vegetative stage, I hung a cheap $20 45 watt LED panel above the plant and had it on when the sun went down all the way to sunrise. Remember that hemp is a C3 plant, and what that means is that it doesn't require a dark period for the plant to photosynthesize. So the plant can thrive in a 24-hour light cycle, which is what I'm doing now. Because of the low watt LED panels, the plant was only getting a little bit of light during the nighttime, which caused her to stretch more than usual during the night to try and grow taller, looking for a stronger light source. While this might sound terrible for a typical grow, this was actually an amazing find for regenerating purposes, because the biggest problem I had from my first regenerating attempt was that all the new growth centered on one small area, and because regenerated plants have a lot more foliage than a typical plant, it got really condensed at the base, which then either requires constant defoliation or run the risk of mold, mildew, and bugs going undetected. By forcing the early growth to stretch out more, I actually got a lower maintenance plant that produced more buds because the new growth was spread out and wasn't constantly fighting each other for more light and space. But back to the grow. For nutrients, right when the plant was harvested, I gave it a full dose of grow nutrients because it's important to get some nitrogen into the plant right away to try and get her to go back into the vegetative stage. After that, I just went back to a typical grow fertilizer regimen of 50% of the recommended dosage for the rest of the vegetative stage. The plant took over a week to start showing signs of new growth, but once that started to happen, it blew up fast, since there's no time wasted in having to wait for the roots to establish. Setup wise, the reason the plant is on top of a plastic bin is because under it is where I place the electrical outlet for the LED light and automatic timer, so that it turns on only at night. The bin pretty much is there to prevent water and moisture from getting to the electrical components. Although I did cheap out and use a spare indoor automatic timer for this, when you should be using one rated for outdoor use. Past that, I didn't really do anything to the plant, just watered it when it needed watering, and now that the plant is a good size, I turned off the lights at night to initiate the flower cycle. I left the plant under the patio for the first few days of the flowering cycle, before I noticed that when the lights were on inside of the house at night, a little bit was getting to the plant, so I had to move it further out where the house lighting wouldn't affect the flowering cycle. Although it looks like I did some type of training to get this many stems, this is just what a natural regenerative plant looks like. I was contemplating using low stress training on one of the stems that grew slightly taller than the other stems to match the rest of the plant. But for outdoor grows, because the sunlight is pretty even throughout the entire plant, it doesn't matter as much as if it was an indoor grow, so I left it alone. From here, things were pretty standard, although now in the beginning of the winter we were getting rolling heat waves of 90 some degrees, which was causing some of the fan leaves to wilt off. Other than that, things were pretty uneventful. I switched from a grow to a bloom fertilizer when I started the flowering cycle, and that's it. I just watered the plant every few days or so, checked to see if anything looked off, and then let nature do its thing. So now that we're near the end of the flowering stage, you can tell that even though one stem is taller than the rest, the entire group of top stems all grew pretty fat and about the same size. Now 2 weeks before harvest, I flushed the plant, and as you can see from the leaves, this started to accelerate the yellowing of the plant due to the heat and from the nutrient deficiencies. One of the benefits that I never hear talked about when flushing is that when a fan leaf turns yellow, they either fall off on their own or is easily plucked off. This actually makes harvesting much easier, as the plant has done a lot of the work for you in terms of having to remove all of the fan leaves. And now, a few days before harvest, we're getting another rolling heat wave, which actually did something I'd never seen before, which was completely burning up the top of 2 of my buds. I've heard about this happening in indoor grows when the light gets too close to a flowering plant, but I've never heard of this happening outdoors before, and definitely not in the middle of winter. But it is what it is, and luckily I was about to harvest anyways before any of the rest of the buds got burnt. And as you'll see, I got lucky in more ways than one due to the timing of my harvest. Since almost all of the fan leaves are gone from the plant at this point, harvesting was just pretty much cutting down each stem. After that, I washed the buds with my typical wash regimen. 1 bin of hydrogen peroxide and water, 1 bin of baking soda, lemon juice and water, and 1 bin of just water to get rid of any excess lemon juice, baking soda, and hydrogen peroxide from the buds. I just soak each stem in each of the bins for a little bit and then hang it all up to dry before taking it inside. Now, what I didn't know was that there was a couple baby caterpillars on my stems that were so small that I didn't see any of them even when I harvested the plant, and luckily still tiny enough that there was no damage on any of the buds or leaves. And what I realized now while washing the stems was that the caterpillars do not like hydrogen peroxide, and just dunking them in it, even though the hydrogen peroxide is really watered down, pretty much instantly killed them. So like I mentioned earlier, I got really lucky because if I harvested any later, some of these could have gotten to the buds before I might have noticed them. Now for trimming, I just skipped it. I'd like to say it's because I wanted to try dry trimming to see what it was like when compared to wet trimming, but honestly I just forgot because it was a long day and all the stems were already hung anyways, so once I remembered the next day, I just let it dry completely. As you can see, there's also one long stem of another plant that I'm drying along with this harvest, but that's a story for another time. This took a little over a week to dry, which is longer than if I trimmed the plant first. And once it was done, I was ready to try my hand at dry trimming. Honestly, dry trimming is not as bad as it originally sounded. While the leaves were a lot closer to the buds, so slightly harder to cut, it wasn't much harder or different when compared with wet trimming, other than some of the sugar leaves after drying just being stuck to the buds when they would have been easily trimmed if wet trimmed. Overall though, it probably took about the same time, if not a little longer, to dry trim everything. And after this experience, I wouldn't mind doing it again if needed, as it does break up the huge amount of time normally spent on harvesting and trimming, because usually both of those have to be done in the same day. In the end, this harvest yielded over 2 ounces and taught me a few lessons about not only how to grow outdoors off season, but how to, or not to, stretch a plant. Also, even though I left the plant in the 3-gallon fabric pot with only pretty much 2 gallons in use, the plant size turned out just as large. I'm not exactly sure why this is, but part of it could be because the plant was forced to stretch more, so the new growth, instead of all concentrated in the center of the plant, had a lot of space to grow into. And that's it.